Desmond.
Yes, volume.
Just continue. I'll do the rest.
Oh, okay. So good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much. Okay. So let us mute all of us so that we can start the class. And just like Mr. Onyango has said, we don't expect any form of misbehavior like we've seen before. And I know we are starting late, but we are sorry for that. So I want us to start without wasting much time. And what you are going to do today, what you are going to learn in our lesson today is a topic that you covered in your previous class, and that was in Form 1. And the topic is cell physiology. So I hope you can hear me clearly. And just before we begin, I want to remind you that if there are any questions, we know how to address them, and you can raise your hand so that I can be able to see you. I will also note, I don't expect to see the private chats and so on and so forth. So please let us take this seriously, and I hope we'll all benefit from our class today. Otherwise, I will share my screen without wasting much time, and I expect that we will be able to see each and every one of us. And welcome to our class. Thank you.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Just I've just disabled the chatting, so I'll make you the host. But at least if somebody want to text you, you can make him. You can allow the settings. Huh?
Oh, okay.
That's all. So please take control. I'll be back shortly.
Oh, okay. So make me the host kindly.
Natengeneza class nyingine hapo inaendelea. Natengeneza class nyingine inaendelea hapo form 2. Oh, class. Tena wanasoma. Sasa leo uko na hao? Nimeshaweka kwa mwingine. Kwa na biology. Wewe ndio wanafunzi.
Okay, so thank you very much. Welcome to our class. This is the topic. The topic is cell physiology, and let me just get to my first page. Okay. Thank you very much, and we are now starting. We will continue admitting your friends who are joining us, and I believe by around 9:30 we won't accept the latecomers. They will join our next class. So I know it's been long since we last had a session like this, and I want to say that we are really working hard to ensure that we keep you updated, and we keep on learning each and every day while at home. So welcome to the biology class. My name is Mr. Desmond Ochieng. I teach Form 2 East and Form 2 Southwest. I know most of you we've interacted, and we decided that during this time we are going to be looking at some of the topics that most of you have always requested us to look at, and that is why we decided that we'll not continue going on with the syllabus, but instead we are going to be looking at those topics that are giving you some minor headaches, and hopefully we will be able to cover them, and we will be able to learn together. And still, if you find some challenges in understanding these topics, you can always channel your complaints or concerns to us directly. So the topic cell physiology is our topic. We are going to start with it today. We may not do everything because our time is limited, but we are going to do it until we complete this topic. I hope we are together. So cell physiology. Okay. So sorry for that. As we start, it is important we know our objectives for this topic, and our objectives are as follows. Number one, some of you are unmuting themselves, and that is wrong, so I will mute everyone. Okay. Now, our objectives for this topic are as follows. Number one, we expect that by the end of this topic, the learners should be able to, number one, you should be able to know what is cell physiology. Number two, you should be able to know, you should be able to describe the structure of a cell membrane, the functions of a cell membrane, and the properties of a cell membrane. Number three, you should be able to discuss or describe the various physiological processes that take place within an organism or within a cell. And that include, number one, diffusion, number two, osmosis, number three, active transport. You should also be able to, at the end of the topic, state or describe the factors affecting the rates of all those physiological processes. And you should also be able to describe the importance of all those physiological processes. And then finally, you should be able to describe what is osmotic pressure, osmotic potential, and osmotic pressure in relation to the plants and animal cells, the applications, how it is applicable in terms of the movements of substances into and out of the cell. So those are the objectives of our topic. And we believe and we are hopeful that by the end of this topic, you should be able to we should be all able to achieve our objectives for the topic. So we are going to start by looking at the definition of cell physiology. Now, cell physiology. Cell physiology, as you can see on my screen, it is described or it is defined as the scientific study of the functions of the cell structures. The functions of the cell structures. Now, I would add that it is the study of the functions of the cell and the cell structures. The functions of the cell and the cell structures. Now, when you talk about the cell structures simply refers to the organelles or those structures which are contained inside the cell. These are basically the cell organelles. So when you talk about the cell organelles, some of them include, examples of cell organelles include, we have got what is called the ribosomes, the Golgi apparatus, the chloroplasts, mitochondria, we have the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, the rough endoplasmic reticulum, plus many others. Apart from that, we have got also other structures which are found on the cell, which include the cell membrane, the cell wall. So when we study the functions of these cell structures and organelles, plus even the cell itself, that is called cell physiology. Okay? So, talking about cell physiology, we have said that it is the scientific study of the functions of the cell structures. Now, the functions of the cell structures refers to those particular processes or particular functions that are carried out by these cell organelles or the cell structures. For example, we have processes that take place in the plant cells, such as photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a process that is particularly carried out by the cell organelles called the chloroplasts. So by studying what is called photosynthesis, that is cell physiology, because photosynthesis in this case is the function of a cell structure, which is the chloroplast. So photosynthesis in the chloroplast is an example of a cell function. We have respiration in the mitochondria is an example of a cell. Is an example of a function of the cell. We also have the protein synthesis, which is primarily carried out in the ribosomes. Other than that, we also have other functions which are carried out by these cell structures. For example, we are going to be looking at the cell membrane. The function of the cell membrane, okay, cell membrane has got several functions, but the main function is to regulate the movement of substances into and out of the cell. It also performs a function of separating the cell structures or the contents of the cell from the surrounding environment. That is another function of the cell membrane. So by looking at these functions of cell membrane, I mean of the cell structures, we're talking about cell physiology. And I hope we are together up to that point. Now, we all know that for these physiological processes, the physiological processes that we have mentioned, for example, photosynthesis, respiration, protein synthesis, for all these physiological processes to take place, then there must be some raw materials that are required for these physiological processes to occur. For instance, talking about the process of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis takes place in the plants. For photosynthesis to take place, then there must be some raw materials. There must be some raw materials which must be made available for the process of photosynthesis to take place. Now, once the process of photosynthesis has taken place, we are going to be having some products that are going to be formed. Apart from that, we are going to be having some some waste products from the process. So the products are going to be useful to the organism and they'll be used up. And then the waste products will be released or will be removed from the body of the organism or from the cell. So that is why we are saying that for physiological processes to occur, the cells must take in raw materials such as water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, mineral salts, and glucose. So all these raw materials must be taken in to facilitate the physiological processes. Now, in the process, the cells produce materials that include secretions and waste products that are harmful. And because they are harmful, they must be gotten rid of or they must be removed from the cells. I hope we are together up to that point. So you can see there are those raw materials which are required by the cells. They are to be used for these physiological processes. So once these physiological processes have taken place, some products are formed. These products are useful to the body of either the plants or animals or even the cells. And then we have got those waste products which are produced as a result of this physiological process. And these waste products, they are very harmful and therefore they must be removed. So I want you to have this picture in your mind. Raw materials get into the body or into the cell for some physiological processes. These raw materials are used up. Once they're used up, products are formed. Once the products have been formed, waste products are there. And therefore, the waste products must be removed. So that is what happens. Now, to maintain life in a cell or in an organism, there must be a constant flow of materials into the cell and out of the cell across a structure on the surface of the cell, which is called the cell membrane. And I want you to get this clearly. For us to maintain life in our bodies, in the bodies of plants, in the bodies of cells, or whichever organism, there must be that constant flow of materials into the cell and out of the cell. So materials are moving to the cell and they're moving out of the cell. That is what brings about the maintenance of life in an organism. And why do we say this brings about maintenance of life in an organism? You know, organisms, for them to survive, they require energy, they require certain materials which they use for their day-to-day lives. Even human beings, we know that we need food, we need oxygen, we need energy, we need various things for us to remain healthy, for us to stay strong. And that is why we are saying that there must be that constant movement. So once we have gotten those raw materials or those substances into our bodies, they perform certain processes, and then waste products must be there. For example, we remove carbon dioxide, we remove excess water in form of urine, we remove the undigested and indigestible substances in the form of feces from our bodies and even from the bodies of other animals. So that is why we are saying that to maintain life in a cell or in an organism, there must be that constant flow of materials into the cell and out of the cell across a structure on the surface of a cell, and we call that the cell membrane. So if you do not know what a cell membrane is, get it from my definition that a cell membrane is a surface structure. It is a surface structure because it is found on the surface. So a cell membrane is a surface structure on the surface of a cell which regulates the movement of substances into and out of the cell. So as we continue, okay, my audio is not clear, I'm told. I don't know whether you can hear me. I'll try as much as possible to be very, very audible. Now, we are saying that for cell physiology, now cell physiology also involves the movement of materials into and out of the cell across the cell membrane. Remember from our definition, we said that cell physiology is a scientific study of the functions of the cell structures. Cell membrane is one of the cell structures. And as you can see from what I'm showing on my screen, we are saying that cell physiology also involves the movement of materials into and out of the cell. Movement of materials into and out of the cell. So what you need to know is that cell membrane being one of the structures of a cell, it is the one that performs the function of regulating the movement of materials into and out of the cell. So we extend cell physiology to cover also the function of cell membrane, because cell membrane is also one of the structures of the cell. So we are saying that hence cell physiology also involves the movement of materials into and out of the cell across the cell membrane. Now, in this topic, we are going to be looking at the movement of substances, the movement of substances into and out of the cell. The movement of substances into and out of the cell is regulated by the cell membrane. So for us to understand the movement of substances into and out of the cell, it is important for us to understand or to study the membrane structures and its properties. So we are going to look at this point, you're looking at the structure of the membrane, not just the membrane, but the cell membrane and its properties. Now, what you need to know is that membranes are surface structures which encloses the cell and the cell organelles. For example, the one that closes the cell is called a cell membrane. The ones that encloses other cell organelles are given other names depending on the structure. For example, we have got what is called a tonoplast. A tonoplast is a membrane that encloses the vacuoles. We have what is called the nuclear membrane. The nuclear membrane is a surface structure which encloses the nucleus, or the nucleus, sorry. We have what is called the mitochondrial membrane. The mitochondrial membrane is a membrane which encloses the mitochondria. We have the ribosomal membrane, we have the chloroplast membrane. So from the name ribosome here, we know that the ribosome membrane is that membrane which encloses the ribosome. Chloroplast membrane is that membrane which encloses the chloroplast. So you can see the naming of these membranes depends on the structure which is enclosed. Now, another thing that you need to know about the membranes is that they have a common basic structure. The membranes have got a common basic structure that regulates the flow of materials into and out of the cell, or with the particular organelle which is enclosed by these membranes. I hope we are together up to that point. Great. So as we continue, now we are looking at the structure of the cell membrane. Now, from your knowledge, I believe we all know that the cell membrane is made or consists of two main layers. One of them is what is called the phospholipid bilayer. Phospholipid bilayer. Now, let me tell you what it means when you talk about phospholipid bilayer. The word phospholipid is here. I believe you can see my cursor. My cursor is pointing at the word phospholipid bilayer. Phospholipid bilayer. Now, phospholipid bilayer simply means the word phospholipid is made up of two words. One, phospho, the other one is lipid. Phospho comes from the word phosphate. Phosphate. Lipid is the normal lipids that we know, or the fats. So phospholipid simply means phosphate and lipids. So this is a layer of phosphates and lipids. So we call it a phospholipid. So we call it phospholipid bilayer because there are two layers. The word bi, as you know, means two. So they are phospholipid. The word phospholipid bilayer means two layers of the phospholipids. Are we together? So phospholipid bilayer, one is found at the top, the other one is found at the bottom. So in between these two phospholipid layers, we have got the protein layers. That is why we are saying that the cell membrane consists of both lipids and proteins. So the fundamental structure of the membrane is the phospholipid bilayer. The fundamental structure of the membrane is the phospholipid bilayer. So as we know, proteins are embedded within the phospholipid layer. Embedded simply means they are sandwiched between two protein layers. They are sandwiched between two protein layers. The proteins embedded within the phospholipid bilayer carry out the specific functions of the plasma membrane, and including selective transport of materials and cell-to-cell recognition. We are going to be able to understand this when we'll be looking at the properties of the cell membrane. The protein, the protein layers and the materials, and cell-to-cell recognition. Just a minute, someone is trying to communicate something here. Okay, sorry for that. Now, I just say that the membranes have a common basic structure. So someone is asking, are all the membranes like the cell membrane? Yes. All membranes have a common basic structure. And that is why we are using a cell membrane as an example for all the other membranes. So if you look at the structure of the cell membrane, you'll be able to note that they are having it is important for you to know that the membranes, okay? Yes, so I believe we can continue. Now, we are going to look at this structure of the cell membrane, the structure of the cell membrane. Look at the structure of the cell membrane here. Look at the structure of the cell membrane. If you look at the structure of the cell membrane, you'll be able to see, it's a very interesting diagram, as you can see. We have got at the top here, we have got these funny diagrams, funny yellow substances that look like oranges, and then we also have some at the bottom here. So these yellow balls, which look like oranges here, there's a layer of lipids. So we call this the lipid layer. Now we have got different types of lipids, as you can see. We have got the glycolipid layer here. We have several of them, as you can see. Then we also have carbohydrate, glycoprotein. Now these are just but substances that make the phospholipid layer here, the phospholipid layer that is at the top here. We also have another phospholipid layer down here. Then in between the phospholipid layer, the two phospholipid layers here, they sandwich or they surround the protein layers which are found in between here. So this is a layer of protein. You need to know Okay, I'm sorry. My audio is, someone is saying it is not audible. Please, I'm sorry for that. If you look at this diagram, you know, if you look at the structure of the cell membrane, in between the cell membrane, we have got some pores. Pores. Pores is the word pores is the letters are P-O-R-E. Pores are small openings which are found on the cell membrane, which allow for selective movement of substances into the cell and out of the cell. Movement of substances into the cell and out of the cell. So that is basically what a pore is. So pores are found inside, or they are found in between the cell membrane, in between the layers of the cell membrane. So these pores are the ones that regulate the movement of substances. Actually, the pores are of very small sizes. They are of very small sizes because they will only allow those substances of the right size. We talk about selective movement. It will only allow those substances of the right size to pass through into the cell and out of the cell. Those ones that are not of the right size will not be allowed to pass through the pores. So if these are a very complicated diagram of the cell membrane. I know it is not very you're not familiar with it, but this is exactly what a cell membrane look like. There are other diagrams, but you simply need to know that the cell membrane comprises of the phospholipid bilayer. We have got a pore, pores plus the protein layers. The functions of the cell membrane. Functions of the cell membrane. Now, the cell membrane performs very many functions, and they include, number one, it separates and encloses the cell contents from its surrounding. It separates and encloses the cell contents from its surrounding. Remember, the cell membrane is common to both the plants and the animal cells. Cell membrane is found in both the plants and animal cells. Both the animal and plant cells have got the cell membrane. So one of the functions of the cell membrane is to separate and to enclose the cell contents from its surrounding. Another function of the cell membrane is it controls the movement of materials into and out of the cell. It controls the movement of materials into and out of the cell. Selective movement of materials into and out of the cell. A very interesting function. Having looked at the functions of the cell membrane, we are now going to look at the properties of the cell membrane. Properties of the cell membrane are the ones that enables it to perform its functions. The properties of the cell membrane are the ones which enable the cell membrane to perform the functions that it does. There are several properties of the cell membrane, and we are going to look at them. Number one, we have what is called semi-permeability. Semi-permeability. Semi-permeability can also be referred to as partial permeability or selective permeability. Partial permeability or selective permeability. That is one of the properties of the cell membrane. Now, what do we mean when you talk about semi-permeability? Some people can say the cell membrane is semi-permeable, or the cell membrane is partially permeable, or the cell membrane is selectively permeable. Now, when you say that the cell membrane has that property, which is semi-permeability, this is the ability of the cell membrane to select what enters and what leaves the cell. It selects what enters and what leaves the cell. It is selectively permeable. So this therefore means that this cell membrane will allow, when it says it is semi-permeable or partially permeable or selectively permeable, this means that it will allow only those substances with the right size or substances of the right size to pass through its pores. We said initially that the cell membrane has pores. So it will only allow those substances with the right size to pass through its pore. So those ones with small sizes will be able to pass through the pores of the cell membrane into the cell. And at the same time, those ones with small sizes will be able to leave the cell and pass through the cell membrane to outside of the cell. So that is why we are saying that the cell membrane is partially or is selectively or is semi-permeable. Now, as you can see, we are saying that this is made possible by the pores that perforate the cell membrane, which allow small-sized molecules to pass through, but not large-sized molecules. The large-sized molecules cannot pass through the small pores that are found on the cell membrane. Now, an example, it is just like using a sieve. You know what a sieve is? A sieve that is sometimes, I know you use it at home to sieve tea. When you're preparing tea, you use a sieve to hold the particles of the tea and allow the filtrate to pass into the cup or into the jug, whichever thing you're using. So that is it. The cell membrane behaves like that. So the cell membrane cannot allow those large-sized molecules to pass through, but it will only allow the ones which are of the right sizes to pass through into and out of the cell. That is why we are saying that it is semi-permeable. Another property of the cell membrane is the cell membrane possesses electrical charges. It possesses electric charges. Now, sorry, excuse me. The cell membrane has both positive and negative charges. The cell membrane has both the positive and the negative charges. Now, for your information, the positive charges are found outside towards the out of the cell membrane, while the negative charges are found towards the inside of the cell membrane. Now, because of that, because the cell membrane has got both the positive and negative charges, this affects the manner in which substances are moved into the cell and out of the cell. And therefore, because of the charges, it helps, the charges help the cell to detect the changes in the environment. Remember, the cell is sometimes, the cells are usually suspended inside the bodies of organisms. They are just found suspended inside the, or they're found, they are surrounded, they're found in different environments, and these environments keep on changing from time to time due to maybe the environment, the changes within the external bodies of an organism or within the external bodies of our cell. So these changes can be detected by the cell because the cell membrane possesses electric charges. And these electric charges are the positive and the negative charges. And like I said, the positive charges are found on the outside part of the cell membrane, and the negative charges are found on the inside part of the cell, membrane. Great. So as we continue to look at another the other property of the cell membrane, and this is the cell membrane is sensitive to changes. And I hope you're taking notes. I hope you're taking notes. Take this seriously. Make sure you're taking some short notes which can help you in your revision, so that we don't take these for granted. Just make sure you're writing some notes. Some of these things are not in my slides. I just keep on referring to some of the notes that I read and I looked at earlier. So some of the things that I'm mentioning are not on my screen. So when you see anything that you'd want to, when you hear or see anything that you want to write, make sure you're putting it down for your own revision and for your future reference, okay? Thank you. So the next property of the cell membrane is it is sensitive to changes in temperature and pH. The cell membrane is sensitive to changes in temperature and pH. Why do we say the cell membrane is sensitive to changes in temperature and pH? One thing that you need to know, and that must always be in your mind, is the cell membrane is made up of protein layer. And I want to take you back, I think you learned this in Form 1. When you're looking at the topic nutrition in plants and animals, you remember that topic? You learned somewhere about the chemicals of life, where you looked at the likes of the polysaccharides, the monosaccharides, and again you went ahead and looked at the enzymes, properties of enzymes, and you learned that the enzymes are proteins in nature, and they can be because they're proteins in nature, they can be denatured at high temperatures, and they can become inactive when the temperatures are low, and they're also affected by changes in the pH. So the cell membrane is made up of a protein layer. And because of that, because it is made up of a protein layer, it can be adversely affected by extreme changes in temperature. When the temperatures are high, they'll be affected. High temperatures affect the cell membrane because it is made up of proteins. And also extreme changes in the pH may also affect the cell membrane. So we are saying that high temperatures denature proteins which are found in the cell membrane, and this alters the structure of the cell membrane, thus hindering its normal functioning. We are saying that high temperatures denature proteins, and this alters the structure of the cell membrane, thus hindering its normal functioning. I hope that point is clear. The same happens to extreme changes in the pH. Now, the cells are usually active in certain ranges of the pH. And even the cell membrane, because it contains proteins, its functioning may be affected when there are certain changes in the pH. Now, extreme changes in the pH will affect the proteins, and proteins being part of the cell membrane, these will affect the functioning of the cell membrane. I hope we are together. And if there are any questions, I know I will let you ask them. Now, those are some of the properties of the cell membrane. Now, the next thing that we're going to be looking at is what helps in the movement of substances across the cell membrane. Now, we're talking about cell membrane regulating the movement of substances across it. In other words, it regulates what gets into the cell and what leaves the cell. Now, but the main question here is, what helps? What makes it possible for substances to pass across the cell membrane, or what makes the substances to move into the cell and leave the cell? Now, we are going to be looking at what we call the physiological processes which help in the movement of substances across the cell membrane. So it was important for us to understand the structure of the cell membrane, the properties of the cell membrane, and the functions of the cell membrane before we look at these physiological processes. Now, these physiological processes are the ones which help in moving substances across the cell membrane. And I believe we are together. Now, the physiological processes through which materials move into and out of the cells include, number one, we have what is called diffusion. We have what is called osmosis. We have what is called active transport. So the first three here are the main physiological processes which help in the movement, which aid in the movement of materials into the cell and out of the cells. Now, this remaining two, phagocytosis, it is not phagocyte, but it is phagocytosis. Now, you need to note that it is phagocytosis and pinocytosis. These two are also useful in moving substances across the cell membrane, but then we don't look at them here. At this level, you have nothing to do with phagocytosis and pinocytosis. But for those of you who are going to be learning biology in the future, those of you who are going to be learning biology, in the future, someone is saying I'm not audible enough. Kindly, I don't know whether you can hear me. Jack Mutuma says he can't hear me clearly. Could you please confirm if I'm audible now? Jack Mutuma. If you could hear me, please let me know. Thank you. So I was saying phagocytosis and pinocytosis. These ones, the two here, we don't learn them at this level, but I think it was important to mention them because they are also processes that help in the movement of materials into and out of the cell. So these two, maybe you can just write them down somewhere and you find out at your own time. You can Google what they mean. I would prefer you use YouTube for them. Just find out on YouTube what is phagocytosis and what is pinocytosis. There are very, very interesting videos on the YouTube which can help you understand this. You can also find out more about okay? I don't know what is wrong. I'm working on my audio kindly. Just a minute. Okay, I hope I'm a bit clearer now. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the response, and I'm sorry for that. So, like I was saying, don't just look at phagocytosis and pinocytosis only. Try and look at even diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. Look at those interesting videos. Look at those interesting videos on diffusion, on osmosis, and on active transport. Very interesting diagrams you're going to see there. Try and see how these processes take place within the cells and even within certain organisms. Now, I want to start by looking at diffusion as our first physiological process. And we are in diffusion. What I expect you to understand, what I expect you to know from diffusion is you should be able to know the best definition of the word diffusion. And please make sure that you do not confuse osmosis, active transport, and diffusion. Do not confuse the two, because in some of the exams that I've been looking at, the ones that we've been doing in school, I noticed that some students do not clearly bring out the differences between diffusion and osmosis. It's a bit confusing, but now this is the time for you to understand what diffusion is. Again, apart from the definition of the word diffusion, make sure you know the importance of diffusion in organisms, or the roles that diffusion plays in organisms, both plants and animals. And then finally, you should be able to note the factors affecting the rate of diffusion. Factors affecting the rate of diffusion. Up to that point, we may not be able, okay, I'll just be able to illustrate some diagram here showing diffusion, but then a practical application of diffusion is also important. This is available on your textbooks, especially in the Form 1 biology textbook. If you look at the topic cell physiology, just look at those diagrams about diffusion, practicals on diffusion, plus even during your free time. If you find it still challenging, you can contact me in the WhatsApp groups that you have, or if you don't have my number, because I know I don't teach some of your classes, you can also reach your teachers, the respective teachers who teach you biology, you know your teachers. You can also ask your friends. So feel free to understand. This is the time to understand these things, okay? So back to our study. Diffusion is our first physiological process. It is there on my screen, diffusion. A very interesting area. And this is just to remind you students, I know you are in Form 2, and I want to assure you that questions from this topic, cell physiology, will never miss any complete biology exam, whether it is in school, whether it is at the national level. Any biology exam which is complete will always contain almost all the biology topics. And so I was just reminding you to take everything here serious. Applications of diffusion, osmosis, and active transport will never miss. So take it seriously, okay? Diffusion. Now, sometimes, maybe even in school, in our classrooms where we always learn, where we used to learn back at school, sometimes you noticed that when a student did something that is unusual, back at the corner or at the front, then after some time you hear others complaining that, oh, someone interfered with the air, so someone ate githeri, someone ate maragwe. And evidence of that could be felt in the noses of everyone. So you could smell some birds, some bad smell coming from various parts of the classroom. Now that happened because that bad smell was produced by somebody. Then after some time, the particles of that particular bad smell moved from that place, from the source at the corner, to all parts of the class. It moved to all parts of the class. So particles are moving randomly. They keep on hitting each other. They keep on hitting each other, and then they do what? They bounce back. They bounce back. So they move. They move. Another example, when you're burning something at home, something that is likely to produce smoke, at the point where you're starting the fire, just a little smoke will be produced. With time, the amount of smoke increases. And then if you start looking at the environment around you, it will be full of smoke. Finally, you've always seen these insects which are useful in pollination. Insects which are useful in pollination. What happens is that these insects are usually attracted. They're usually attracted by the sweet scent, the scent that are produced by the flowers. So that is an illustration of what diffusion is. So from all my examples, you'll be able to note that at one point, there is a high concentration of a particular substance at one point. And then with the time, the concentration increases or it becomes uniform within a given area after some time. And that is what diffusion is, as simple as that. When we have a high concentration of a particular substance in one region and a low concentration of another of the same substance in another region, we get to have two regions where one is highly concentrated with a particular substance, another region where there is a low concentration. So that difference between the concentration, the difference in concentration between the high concentrated region and the low concentrated region is defined as diffusion gradient or concentration gradient. Now, I want us to define the word diffusion. The definition is down my screen. Diffusion refers to the movement of particles of a substance. The movement of particles of a substance from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. That is diffusion. Movement of particles of a substance from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration is called diffusion. Now, diffusion, or this movement of particles of a substance, will continue to take place. It will occur until there is an even distribution in the available space. Until we have an equal distribution of these particles of a substance. Now, if you have a jar of water, let's say a cup of hot water, and then you put tea, not tea, let me use an example of sugar. Then you dip some particles of sugar, then you stir. You stir the jar of hot water with sugar in it. The sugar will dissolve, and then as it dissolves, it moves. What brings about the dissolving is the movement of great. If you have a question, please raise your hand. I will be able to see. I'll be able to see you. If you raise your hand, I'll be able to see you so that I can. Some of you asking questions on the chat. Please raise your hand so that I'm just able to click and let you ask the question. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Just raise your hand. I'll be able to see you if you have a question, and I'll let you talk. Okay. Okay. Someone trying to find them here. Austin, yes. I'm trying to unmute you. Just a minute. Austin, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I can hear you. Kindly ask the question.
Teacher, you said that diffusion takes place in liquids and gases alone, but we were told that diffusion takes place in particles.
Okay, I'll be able to explain the point. I was just about to explain that. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Austin. I'll respond to that after I've just made the last point. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, Austin, I want you to mute. Kindly mute. Thank you. Great. So I was making my last point about the diffusion before I looked at the question that has been asked by Austin. Talking about diffusion. Now you'll realize that this movement of substances, it can only be possible, the random movement of particles of a substance can only be possible in a space that is available. The space could be either in gases or in liquids. For example, I've mentioned a jar or a glass containing water. A glass containing water. Water is liquid. So if you dip sugar in it, the sugar particles will be able to move inside the water, and water is liquid. Another example, if we have got particles of smoke moving in the air is a gas. Particles of smoke moving in the air. It becomes possible for them to move in the gas because within the gas, the particles of a gas are loosely packed. So it can allow for the random movement of the smoke particles. The same happens to the liquids. Liquids, the particles of a liquid are loosely packed. They're not like a solid. They're not intact. They're loosely packed. And so it allows for that easy movement of substances. So my next point here says that this movement occurs until the particles are evenly distributed in the available space. Until we have got what is called equilibrium or an equal concentration, that is when diffusion will stop. Until we have an equilibrium or equal concentration, that is when diffusion will stop, because there will not be having a region which is highly concentrated and another region that is lowly concentrated, but we'll be having an equal concentration. We'll be having an equal concentration. So some people are worried about diffusion taking place. Now, the last point that I've said, that diffusion occurs in liquids and gases. Now, let me tell you why we don't talk about solids here. Solids have got their particles intact, very, very intact. Their particles are held together. So the particles can only diffuse where there is space. And in liquids, they can diffuse because the particles of the liquid particles are loosely packed. But the ones for gases are very, very loosely packed. If you compare liquids and gases, you'll find that the gases are they are scattered. The particles of a gas are scattered. And so movement can occur in between these particles at a faster rate. If you compare liquids, the particles of a liquids are also loosely packed. And so that is why we can have diffusion taking place in between the particles of a liquid or molecules of a liquid for that case. So that is why if you put sugar in water, you stir it, the molecules of sugar or the particles of sugar will be able to move in between the particles of what? Of the water. If there is a bad smell coming from some place, you'll be able to feel the bad smell because the bad smell moved in between the particles of the gas. So those who are asking, can diffusion take place in solids? No, because look at this. This is my phone. There is no way I can put a substance here on the surface of my phone and expect it to move to all parts of the what? To all parts of the solid. Solid particles are intact. So it does not allow for movement of particles to all parts. I hope I've answered that question. Let me see who asked it and find out if it's answered. This was asked by Chris Lewis and Vincent Kinyo was also okay. Chris Lewis was asking, I hope you answered, you can confirm whether you answered there. And then there's a question from Vincent Kinyo, which is asking, can you add across a concentration gradient in the word diffusion? Okay, let me just explain what we mean. I'll be able to explain that when you get to the next point, and that is where I'm headed. So the difference in concentration of particles between the region of high concentration and the region of low concentration is called a diffusion gradient or a concentration gradient. Get that? The difference in concentration, whereby we have one region which is highly concentrated and another region which is lowly concentrated. The difference is what is called a diffusion gradient or a concentration what? Gradient. When you're talking about diffusion, I want you to note that diffusion will only take place when there is a diffusion gradient or when there is a concentration what? Gradient. When there is a concentration gradient or when there is a diffusion gradient, that is when diffusion will take place. And why do I say this? We say this because diffusion will take place or it will begin from the point where we have got a high concentration. And movement of particles occurs as these particles move from where they are highly concentrated to where they're lowly concentrated. And we say that the movement will stop once there is an even distribution of particles in the available what? Space. So diffusion takes place along, not across, along a concentration what? Gradient. Diffusion takes place along a concentration gradient. And when I say along a concentration gradient, that means that from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. Please do not use the word concentration gradient in the wrong way, okay? Some will say against a concentration gradient, across a concentration gradient. No, it is along a concentration what? Gradient, okay? Now, is the word equilibrium must be there in the definition of diffusion? No. The word equilibrium is not supposed to be there. I was just saying that equilibrium here means equal. Something that is equilibrium means it is equal, the balance. So that is when we have equilibrium, that is when diffusion will stop. As in when there is equal concentration, that is when diffusion will stop. So to demonstrate diffusion, oh, someone is saying he can't hear. Sorry for that. Sorry for that. I believe you can hear me now. I will not look at this, but there's an experiment here that shows how to demonstrate diffusion. This is a crystal of potassium manganate 7. A crystal of potassium manganate 7. It is dipped here, and then if it is left, you'll see it will be moving. It will move to all. It will be distributed to all parts of the jar, of the beaker, to all parts of the water in the beaker there. So this is what we mean by diffusion. So look at the solute here. Our solids here. Look at the diagram here kindly. This is sugar particles inside the water particles. Sugar particles. The red ones are the sugar particles. Inside the blue ones, which is the water particles. So diffusion begins. At this point, while we have got the solute here, we have got a high concentration of the sugar particles. Sugar is highly concentrated at this point, but after some time, diffusion takes place so that there'll be equal distribution of the sugar particles. As you see in the next diagram here, we have sugar particles distributed in all parts. At this point, in the first diagram here, the sugar particles are only in one point, but after some time, the sugar particles move to all parts of the what? Of the diagram you can see here, to all parts of the solvent. So look, we have got the sugar particles in almost all parts. So this is diffusion. At this point, we have, in the next diagram here, as you can see, we have got an equilibrium. There is an even distribution of the solutes. So diffusion can stop at that point. Once we have got an equal distribution, of the what? Of the solutes. Once you have got an equal distribution of the solutes. Okay? So, the next thing that, this is just still about the experiment, but I said we may not be able to understand the experiment because it is just my own procedure and the rest. and because of the interest of time, I think what is important for you to note there is all that I've highlighted. Okay? Great. So just trying to find out if there are any questions up to that point before I look at the next part about which is the role of diffusion in living organisms. Why is diffusion important here? Why is diffusion important in living organisms? Why is diffusion important in living organisms? If there are any questions, maybe you can let me know. Any questions that you'd want to let me know or answer? Okay, thank you. I haven't seen any question. I'm happy that we are all understanding and we're all together. But again, if you find any question or any area that you'd want me to emphasize, just let me know. Or if there is a place you didn't understand, just let me know. I will be able to repeat. I am here to make sure that you understand this topic. Okay? Great. Roles of diffusion in living organisms. The roles of diffusion in living organisms. Now, diffusion plays very many roles in living organisms, both in plants and in animals, and even in those unicellular organisms. When I say unicellular organism, that is an organism that is only made of a single cell. We call it unicellular organism. So there are very many roles that are played by osmosis. But before we get into these roles played by osmosis, kindly let me remind you again that I'm talking about diffusion, not osmosis, sorry. Roles of diffusion. Before I look at these roles played by diffusion, let me remind you that we said that for diffusion to take place, then there must be what we call a concentration gradient or a diffusion gradient. And what is a concentration gradient? A concentration gradient is the difference in concentration between two regions where one region is highly concentrated and another region is lowly concentrated. So diffusion will take place since there'll be movement of substances from a region which is highly concentrated to a region which is lowly concentrated. I hope you're together up to that point. Once you've understood that, it becomes very easy for us now to understand the roles of diffusion. Number one, the first role of diffusion in living organisms, absorption of materials. Absorption of materials, such as, number one, the first case here. The first case is plants absorb dissolved mineral salts from the soil into the root cells by diffusion. Plants absorb dissolved mineral salts from the soil into the root cells by diffusion. Now, we know that inside the soil, in some cases, I expect some question from somebody about the dissolved mineral salts. You remember when we were talking about in Form 2 when we were looking at absorption of water and mineral salts? Someone is about to ask that. But let me explain this. Dissolved mineral salts, in some cases, you'll find that the concentration of dissolved mineral salts inside the soil is high than inside the root cells. So as you can see, we have got a high concentration of dissolved mineral salts from the inside the soil and a low concentration of dissolved mineral salts inside the root cells. So there is that concentration gradient. So because of osmosis, the dissolved mineral salts will move from the soil and get into the root cells across the cell membranes of the root cells. Remember, we have got what we call the root hair cells, which are found in the roots. The root hair cells in the roots. Root hair cells have got cell membranes. So these dissolved mineral salts will be moving through diffusion from the soil into the root hair cells, across the cell membranes of the root hair cells. So because there is a high concentration of mineral salts in the soil, they'll move across the cell membrane into the root cells. That is the first one. The second one, animals absorb digested foods from the ileum into the bloodstream by diffusion. And let me explain this. When we eat, when we take in food, this food undergoes the process of digestion are taken in or are removed, sorry, the waste products are removed or are digested out of the body, what happens is can you hear me? I believe I lost my internet for a short while, but I'm back. Animals absorb digested foods. Those important nutrients, once the process of digestion has taken place, those important nutrients will be highly concentrated in the ileum. And so you find that in the bloodstream, there will be a very small concentration of this mineral, of these nutrients. So those nutrients, because they are highly available in the ileum where digestion took place, they move from the ileum where their concentration was high to the bloodstream where the concentration is what? Is low. So diffusion now occurs since these nutrients are highly concentrated in the ileum, a longer concentration gradient to the bloodstream where their concentration is low. And then once they get in the bloodstream, they are transported by the blood to all other parts of the body where they're required. Because you remember we said one of the important functions of blood is it helps in the transportation of what? Of nutrients. It helps in the transportation of nutrients. So these nutrients are transported by the bloodstream to all parts of the body where they're required, and they're further used to produce energy. They're broken down to release energy and to help in other functions within the cell. So that is for the case of absorption. The next one is translocation. Translocation is the transport. Translocation is a transport of Ian Mugambi. I will let you ask your question shortly. Thank you. This is the transport of manufactured food from leaves to other parts of the plant. The transportation of manufactured food from the leaf to other parts of the plant. That is called translocation. Now, in the leaves, food in the leaves, that is where the process of photosynthesis occurs. And you know that? So it means that there is a high concentration of food at the leaves once photosynthesis has taken place. So because at that point, once photosynthesis has occurred, we'll be having a high concentration of food in the leaves and a low concentration of food in other parts of the plant. So these food substances will diffuse. And translocation in plants, I hope you all remember that. What helps in the translocation or movement in plants, we have got what we call the vascular bundles. The vascular bundles which assist in this movement. So these vascular bundles, for the ones that help in the transportation of manufactured food, we all know it is the phloem. So this phloem, it provides the channel through which the diffusion of these substances occurs. So the diffusion of these manufactured food substances occurs through the phloem. That mechanism through which these food substances move along the phloem is called diffusion. So because there is a high concentration of those manufactured food substances in the leaves, the diffusion occurs through the phloem, and these food substances are transported to other parts of the plant where they are required. And at that point, their concentration will be low. So diffusion will stop once you have got an equal concentration of food substances. So we're saying that diffusion is one of the mechanisms involved in translocation. That therefore means that there are other mechanisms which I believe you learned when you're looking at the process of translocation. Before I look at the next function of, my time is left with about 15 minutes, and I need to finish this and look at the factors affecting the rate of diffusion. So I will let you ask your questions when I'm done. So kindly just bear with me. I just mentioned these ones very fast. Gaseous exchange. This is the physical process by which respiratory gases pass across a respiratory surface. The physical process by which respiratory gases pass across a respiratory surface. It occurs by diffusion. So diffusion helps these respiratory gases to move across the respiratory surface. Now, understand this. When you have high concentration of a respiratory gas at one point and a low concentration of a respiratory gas at another point. For example, inside the bodies of organisms, we know we have got a high concentration of it is very unfortunate that some of us have not looked at this area in the topic gaseous exchange in Form 2. But I believe, let me just make a highlight of this, but more of it you're going to look at when you're going to be looking at the topic gaseous exchange in Form 2. So you find that we have got the respiratory surfaces. So outside the respiratory surfaces, sometimes we may be having a high concentration of a particular gas. Take, for example, when you breathe in air, which contains a lot of oxygen, this air will be taken into your body, into the lungs, and then at the lungs, it will be taken to the respiratory surface, the alveoli. So there, on the surface, outside the surface, you may find that there's a high concentration of oxygen and a low concentration of oxygen inside. Are we together? So because of diffusion, air will be, this oxygen will be diffusing from a region which is highly concentrated, and that is outside the respiratory surface, across the respiratory surface, and then it gets into the what? To inside the bloodstream, where it is now transported to other, it is transported to other parts of the body. So that is gaseous exchange. The same happens when there is a high concentration of carbon dioxide inside the blood and a low concentration of carbon dioxide outside the respiratory surface. So this carbon dioxide, it will diffuse from the bloodstream across the respiratory surfaces to outside the respiratory surface, and then it is therefore breathed out easily through the nose. More of gaseous exchange will be able to learn when we look at the topic gaseous exchange in Form 2. Okay, so just for this time, just know that gaseous exchange is facilitated by the process of diffusion, so that gases move from where they're highly concentrated to where they're lowly concentrated, and vice versa. Excretion in cells and unicellular organisms. Excretion in cells and unicellular organisms. We know that excretion is the process by which harmful waste products are removed from the bodies of organisms. So we have got cells. The process by which those harmful products, waste products, are removed from the cells is diffusion. Because at one point you'll find that these waste products are highly concentrated inside the cells and lowly concentrated outside the cells. So what happens is that they will diffuse from the cells where their concentration is high to outside the cells where their concentration is low. So that movement from, assume this is my cell. Let me use my mouse here. Sorry. If this is a cell, I believe you can see it. If this is a cell, this cell contains waste products inside it. So the cells, the waste products will move from the cell where they're highly concentrated to outside the cell where their concentration is low. So that is excretion. And apart from that, we also have these unicellular organisms, the likes of amoeba. Amoeba is an example of a unicellular organism. So these unicellular organisms, because they do not have complex excretory organs which can be used to expel this waste product, they use diffusion as a mechanism of removing these waste products. Let me repeat the point again. Unicellular organisms do not have complex excretory organs. Are we together? So because of that, they use diffusion as a mechanism through which they expel those waste products. Are we together? So this is how it works. When there is a high concentration of those waste products inside the bodies, diffusion occurs so that, remember, these unicellular organisms are surrounded by cell membrane. They do not have any complex organs. So what surrounds their bodies is cell membrane. So diffusion occurs across the cell membrane. So these waste products pass across the cell membranes from inside the unicellular organisms to their surroundings. That is how diffusion occurs there. The last importance or role is material exchange between the maternal blood and fetal blood occurs by diffusion across the placenta. You'll get to learn more of this when we get to Form 3 in the topic reproduction. But just note that material exchange of substances or materials occurs through diffusion between the maternal blood and the fetal blood across the placenta. When there is that exchange, the mother and the fetus, they exchange materials such as food, oxygen, and the rest through diffusion across the placenta. Great. Very fast, allow me mention very fast factors affecting the rate of factors affecting the rate of diffusion. Factors affecting the rate of diffusion. Number one, as we have all seen, we have looked at the definition of osmosis of diffusion, and we have looked at the roles of diffusion. So allow me to mention within the few minutes factors affecting their diffusion, and there are about 5 factors. Some of them are very, very easy to understand. Now, temperature is the first one. An increase in temperature leads to an increase in the rate of diffusion, while a decrease in temperature leads to a decrease in the rate of diffusion. Why do we say this? Why do we say this? If you're told to explain. Now, I noticed in an exam that some of you are just saying that increase in temperature leads to increase in the rate of diffusion. Decrease in temperature leads to decrease in the rate of diffusion. Then you stop there. You can't score all the marks there, especially if it's a serious exam. We won't give you all the marks. We will not give you all the marks. But this is the explanation. Once you have mentioned that, you need to explain that this temperature, when the temperature increases, the increase in temperature increases the kinetic energy. Are we together? The kinetic energy of the molecules, so that they'll keep on moving randomly and faster. They make them, the kinetic energy, once it is increased, it makes the molecules to move very fast. Kinetic energy is the energy in motion. It is the opposite of potential energy. So this kinetic energy makes the molecules to move very fast. So as that movement is made faster, that means that the rate of diffusion also is made fast. So we are saying that as the temperature increases, the kinetic energy of the molecules increase, making them to move faster and further. They move faster and further from each other. While the drop in temperature decreases the kinetic energy. So when the kinetic energy of is decreased, it means that the molecules will not be moving faster, and they will not be moving, and they also not, sorry, they'll not be moving faster, and they will also not be moving further. Are we together? So we are saying that an increase in temperature leads to an increase in the kinetic energy of the molecules, making them to move faster and further. They move faster and further. The next point is what we call diffusion gradient. Diffusion gradient. Diffusion gradient refers to the difference in concentration between two regions. Difference in concentration between two regions. So the greater the difference in concentration of a substance between two regions, the faster the rate of movement of those molecules from the region of high concentration to the region of low concentration until an even concentration or equilibrium is achieved. So when there is a greater diffusion gradient, the rate of diffusion will be faster than when there is a small diffusion gradient. When there is a greater diffusion gradient, I mean when there is a region which is highly concentrated and a region which is lowly concentrated, the rate of diffusion for that case will be very, very fast. But when there is a region which is just not very highly concentrated and another region which is not very lowly concentrated, then the rate of diffusion will be not very fast. Okay? So you're saying that diffusion is faster when the concentration gradient is high, and it is lower when the concentration gradient is low. So we're saying that diffusion will continue until an even concentration or equilibrium is achieved. Number 3, size of diffusing molecules. The size of diffusing molecules. Now, when the diffusing molecules are small and light, when we have small and light molecules, they will diffuse faster than when we have large and heavy molecules. Sorry, there is power out, so blackout, so that means I know you can't see me clearly. We're saying that when we have small and light molecules, the rate of diffusion will be faster than when we have large and heavy molecules. Take for example, if you have gas molecules and the liquid molecules, gas molecules will diffuse faster than the liquid molecules. Why? Because the gas molecules are small and are very light. Because of that, they can diffuse faster as compared to those liquid molecules which are not as light as the gas molecules. So we are saying that diffusion is faster if the diffusing molecules are small and light than if they are large and heavy. Number 4, membrane thickness. Membrane thickness, or what others would say, thickness of the tissues or thickness of the membranes. Membrane thickness or thickness of the tissues. It is the same point. Are we together? So we are saying that it takes a longer time for molecules to diffuse across a thick membrane. Check, for example, if you have a membrane whose thickness is this, and if you have a membrane whose thickness is this thickness and this thickness, you find that it will take a longer time for substances or molecules to diffuse across a thick membrane, and it will take a very short time for molecules to diffuse across a thin membrane. So we are saying that it takes a longer time for molecules to diffuse across a thick membrane because the distance to be covered by the diffusing molecules is greater than a thin membrane. Are we together? The next point is surface area. I've not included it here, but let me just mention it. Surface area.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
What time are you finishing?
I'm in 2 minutes time, Molim.
Okay, then please remind me so that I save it. Don't end the meeting before I save it.
Okay, thank you.
Continue.
I'm sorry for that. It takes a very short time. Okay, I was talking about surface area. Now look at this book and this font here. This one here.
Itself.
I'm sorry for the noise. I'm sorry for the noise. I'm sorry for the noise. Okay. If you have got two membranes, two surfaces, look at this. I'll give you an example using this book and this one. This one has a small surface area. This one has got a large surface area. So when we have two surfaces, when one has got a large surface area and the other one has a small surface area, we are saying that the one diffusion will occur faster on a membrane which has a large surface area than a membrane which has got a small surface area. So diffusion is faster on a large surface area than on a small surface area. The next point that I want to explain, which is always difficult for students to understand, is the point about surface area to volume ratio. Surface area to volume ratio. Now, if you look at those organisms which have got small bodies and those organisms which have got large bodies, number one, I want us to agree on two things. Organisms which have got small bodies have got a small surface area. Organisms which have got very large bodies, they have got a very large surface area. That one we all know. But now when you're talking about the concept of surface area to volume ratio, it is the other way. Small organisms expose a large surface area to their volumes. Take, for example, an example of amoeba and an elephant. Amoeba, we are saying that amoeba will expose a very large surface area. Much of their bodies are exposed. In fact, almost everywhere. So, diffusion occurs very fast because of their volumes. So we are saying that the surface area to their volume ratio is very small. It's very large, sorry. The surface area to the surface area to volume ratio of their bodies is very small. It's very large, sorry. They've got a large surface area to volume ratio, and therefore they expose much of their bodies to their surrounding, as compared to an elephant, which is very big. Because they're very big, they only expose just a small part. In fact, almost their skin only. It's only their skin that will be exposed. Are you together? So they expose a very
Hello, Desmond. Hello, excuse. How are you? Hello. This one will be. Oh, I'm even muted. Coming in short with an assignment, Alan. So you'll join the class at 11. The assignment will be sent. You said he'll meet you on Monday next week.